Oh. Welcome to Southwest Rotary, the most awesomest club in the world. Today for invocation, we have Steve. Steve in here? There's Steve. Good to see you, Steve. Well, thank you for greeting, Paul. Thank you. Okay. And so now today, is Josh in the room? Yay, here, come on up, Josh. We have a new member joining us today, Dave Kirby. Oh my goodness, you're really prepared.
I know. I just got handed it to me. All right, hey guys, I want to introduce you to Dave Kirby. He is the executive director of TRIP, a national transportation research nonprofit headquartered in Washington, D.C. Besides managing the day-to-day operations of TRIP, Dave serves as a spokesperson to the news media. Prior to joining TRIP, Dave was with the Associated General Contractors of Washington and was also a Rotarian with the Downtown Yakima Rotary Club for 10 years. Dave and his wife Sharon moved to Washington, D.C. right before the pandemic, but ended up in Boise so their daughter Alexis could finish high school in person as she was returning from her year abroad as a Rotary Youth Exchange Ambassador in Germany. While in Boise, Dave was an active member in the Rotary Club of Boise Southwest. Dave and Sharon recently moved back to Yakima, and despite the peer pressure to rejoin the downtown club, the fun atmosphere and friendly members of Southwest Rotary sealed the deal for him to join the most awesomest club in the world. So here's to Dave.
We'll have to get a picture afterwards with you two. Welcome, Dave. Yeah, we are known as the Fun Club if you haven't heard that out on the streets. Okay, and Dave, I had to look through your Facebook page to find those pictures, so I hope that they're the good pictures. So we have our birthdays, and we're almost through the month of August. Can you guys believe that? We're almost through the month of August. So still coming up, we have Lisa's, Tony, and Tom. So those are the rest of the birthdays we have for this month. And then those member anniversaries, it's the same anniversaries that we've seen all month. We have Steve, Dave, 36 years, Curtis, 39, Elliot, 2, and Josh at 3. So thank you for your dedication to the club. And we do still have a lot of fun coming up. Where's Lizzie? Lizzie's going to come up here and talk in just a minute. While she's coming up this way, I'll announce a few other things we have. Obviously, those of you that joined us last week, we had an amazing first social of the year. September the 21st, that's going to be an all Rotary celebration. It's going to be a luncheon tour out at Pacific Northwest University. So they're wanting us to come out around 11:45, and we're going to have lunch, and we're going to do tours. I know for some of you that doesn't work in your schedules. We'll still do a club meeting that week because that is on a Thursday, but they are trying to get all 3 Rotary clubs out there for that nice luncheon. And then on the 23rd, I'm going to have Stephanie talk in a minute. We're going to be at the Sunfair Parade. And then the day we're going to be at the STEM booth. So lots of fun things coming up. That's just for the month of September. You can see the other things that are coming up later in the month. But I'm going to turn it over to Lizzie to talk about our next social.
Yay. So thank you for everybody that came last Tuesday on the hottest day of the year. We had 70 people attend. So Jim, the owner of Public House, goes, wow, you guys are committed. So thank you. Yeah. And so on everybody's table is sign-up sheets for Guess Who's Coming to Happy Hour. The concept is to meet 6 to 8 fellow Rotarians at a location here in town for happy hour. You're not going to know who's going to be there, so it's kind of like a blind date with your fellow members. You're going to get to know each other, just spend some time with food and laughter. I put down if you have any allergies, and if there's a certain location, West Valley, East Valley, downtown, don't put a restaurant because I'm not going to give it to you. So, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Lizzie. Oh, I have a question. Uh-huh. Is what? Yeah, there's some signups on your, there are some signups on your tables for that event, and then also you can do it through Club Runner. And if you have any questions, go ahead and talk to Lizzie about it. We know how much everybody loves Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, so we thought let's try it out with cocktail hour. And you can have coffee, tea, or whatever you choose, but we thought it would be fun. Okay, Stephanie, could you come up and speak for a couple of big community service projects coming up?
Hello. All right. So Saturday, the September 23rd, is going to be very busy for Rotarians. You have the opportunity to participate with UBS and walk in these unfair shifts. They need 13 volunteers per shift. Tressa should be sending you an email shortly to sign up. Spouses, children, as long as they can help somebody do the activity, are old enough to participate. If you come to the STEM booth, you get your fair admission ticket and free parking. So bonus. There you go. Oh, Healthy Futures. We are meeting Thursday at Northwest Harvest, a committee, and then we will know how many Rotarians twice a month are going to get to go to Northwest Harvest and pack food bags for families in our valley. And Lynn, you want to talk real quick about a little bit about it? No, I think we're good. There you go.
Okay, so if you have any questions about those opportunities, we're going to have lots of service opportunities this year, so go ahead and check with Stephanie. The STEM booth is in partnership with ESD 105, so it's been a huge success the last couple of years, and so we're excited to have Southwest Rotary help out. And then this is the final announcement for Ron Rockstrom, who is wanting to become a member of our club. So if anybody has any concerns or knows anything, please let me know. And then Stephanie did talk about this. We do have some new Rotary opportunities. I know that last year Dirk gave most everybody in the club a shirt, so you know that. They're not 16, I think like 25. Okay, thanks, Christine. Okay, so today after the meeting, there will be a social committee meeting in here. And then I only had one person that actually read the bulletin and realized I made a mistake. I had put the next week, I put August the 28th, which is actually the 29th. There will be our first official Ways and Means Committee to begin planning the auction after this meeting. So more to come on that, but we're excited to have our committees working hard already this year. Any other announcements that I'm not aware of? Okay. So is Jason here for Sergeant at Arms? Jason is not here? Okay. So this is how I'm going to get. Okay. Okay, we're going to do that. Okay, who's got the raffle number? What's the number? Okay. Did you? Oh, okay. Okay, so then is there any happy bucks? Okay, go ahead, Steve. Congratulations. Congratulations. Oh, go ahead. Bob. Bob, it's great to have you here. Go ahead, Bill. With Stephanie. Yeah, I'm just exhausted. Well, I just get exhausted looking at Facebook with Stephanie. Okay, thanks. Anybody else? Oh, go ahead, Gene.
Yeah, so I've been waiting to do this for a while, and it's been an amazing summer for me and my family. We had a granddaughter that was born this summer, Isla Rose.
Oh,
so
cute.
She was born May 10th, and then we also had a grandson that was born July 25th, and Jonathan Eugene River, that's a great name, by the way. So pretty proud of that. 6 is a magic number. Does anybody know what 6 is? No?
Special guest today.
President Lynn. It is my pleasure to introduce our program and guest speakers today. I will actually introduce one speaker, and then Lieutenant Chad Janis will introduce the rest. So we are fortunate to have with us today a very distinguished group of the Criminal Investigation Division of the Yakima Police Department. Our topic today is about gangs and domestic violence in our valley. Lieutenant Chad Janis has been a police officer for more than 23 years. He began his career in 2000 with the Wapato Police Department. In 2003, he joined the Yakima Police Department. Lieutenant Janis has served as a patrol officer, school resource officer, detective, sergeant, and now serves as the lieutenant in charge of the Criminal Investigation Division. Lieutenant Janis has extensive experience in investigating and leading community violence reduction interventions. In addition to his investigative experience, he currently leads the Yakima Domestic Violence Coalition, which aims to reduce the harm
You raise your hand if you've ever heard this stereotype about Yakima, that Yakima is just full of gang violence. Something we've probably all heard. In my previous job, I was in charge of our recruiting department, and so we would try to recruit police officers to come to Yakima, kind of an important role in policing this day and age, and as you can imagine, over the last handful of years has been somewhat of a challenge for people across the country. We would hear the same thing. We would try to recruit families and police officers. We worked with some of the people in the room to think of some creative ideas on how to do that. And that was one thing we always heard. And that's not to say that that's not to some degree accurate, but my guess is most people in this room have never been involved in a gang crime, mostly because those are, for the most part, siloed within that type of culture. But what we do know is they're very violent. And so in terms of addressing it, we have to figure out what drives it. Just like in domestic violence, we use a data set called the lethality form, and that tells us what is driving our problem. And what we now know about domestic violence 2 years into our project is that mental health, homelessness, and the inability to break up is what's driving our domestic violence problem. Now, 2 years ago, you may have heard different theories on what was driving it, but that's what we know because we ask every single domestic violence survivor at every single incident 14 questions about what's going on in their life that may be contributing to these outcomes of 911 calls, police presence, family disruption, so on and so forth. So we're going to start with a little bit of history about domestic violence, and I am going to turn it over to one of our experts, Detective Kelly Saldana, and she's going to go through the first few slides of just kind of give you a baseline of what we're talking about when we say gangs.
Okay, I've been told to make this quick, but I am as passionate about gangs as Lieutenant Janis is about domestic violence. Okay, so the first thing I want to say is that I did not grow up here. I moved here 17 years ago to work here. I thought I was going to leave. I thought I would get my time in here, kind of learn, get my feet underneath me, and then move to like maybe the Portland area where I have family. I stayed. I love living in this city. I love living in this area. I live within the city of Yakima, and I'm very glad that I do. I'm very comfortable here. For all of the gang members I interact with, I also have never been the victim of gang crime. Some of the gangs that we have in this area, we are primarily what would typically be referred to as a Hispanic gang type of area. We have norteños and sureños. They're not necessarily only Hispanic by ethnicity. They're not only Hispanic members. We do have people of all races involved in them. This is just some of what you would see in our area. Some of them are very local, only for this area. Some of them are more regional or nationwide. Briefly, all of our street gangs get orders from prison gangs. So we have Nuestra Familia runs the norteños, the red guys, and the Mexican Mafia, La M, they run the sureños, the blue guys. They are not exactly the same, but they do have such an interaction that to talk about our local street gangs and then not discuss these two groups, these organized crime groups, would just really not get the full picture. Generally speaking, you'll see that norteños are represented by the number 14. They use the letter N out of the 14th letter of the alphabet. That's what that number comes from. You might see it represented as 4 dots or 4 lines or an X and a 4 as in the Roman numeral X, 10, 14. Sureños are very similar. M from the letter M from the Mexican Mafia, La M. That's the 13th letter of the alphabet. That is why that number has significance. And it's the same thing. You might see 3 dots. You might see 3 lines. You might see an X and a 3. It gets represented all different kinds of ways. The colors come from the prisons. So both gangs originally started in California prisons. And the Sureños, they started first. It was a way of protecting the Hispanics that were going into the California prisons. You know, you have to gang up if you want some sort of protection from the other inmates that are victimizing you. The problem was that they then started victimizing other Hispanic prisoners. And so in response to that, the norteños started. So the Southerners, the people from the southern end of California, they were blue. And then the prisoners from the northern end of California, the Northerners, the norteños. They got assigned the colors because when they were in prison and they were fighting, the prison guards wanted a way to tell them apart. So they assigned them bandanas. Blue for you guys, red for you guys. They then took that and that became their culture, or part of their culture. And then that then filtered out into the streets and is now filtered out across the nation. Just a good example of repercussions of decisions made, unintentional entirely. Very old picture of our unit. I am the only one. No, I guess Thomas. Thomas is in the photo. Me and my partner on the very far right there. Only ones left, and we have new members after that. I think we have now a total of 5 of us. We're expecting a new sergeant in November, and we do a lot of work with our partner agencies. We're all task force officers with the ATF. Our primary focus is locating violent offenders, convicted felons who are in unlawful possession of firearms, and we use whatever tools are available to us to either gain compliance or to remove them from the equation. We do a lot of work with our partners at the U.S. Attorney's Office. We work with agencies throughout the valley. Our partnerships with our sister agencies is so incredibly important. It has literally saved lives, and I've been very proud to work with some very fine investigators throughout the county. And one of the ones that we're actually, I think, the most proud of is actually the one that has nothing to do with
a lot of these guys started to build their stature amongst the gang. You know, that's how you start getting noticed and getting a name for yourself. Because there's definitely, in these gangs, there's definitely tiers that you start to learn as far as the names that you hear that are in these gangs. There's definitely tiers to the ones that, get more respect, have more known versus the ones that aren't so much. And so usually how you get known is by, getting your name out there. People know that you're committing robberies, you're committing, shootings. You're a shooter. It's it's always a cool thing to be a shooter and stuff like that. So, is that it?
All right. So a snapshot of what the data looks like over the last 3 years. We have really done an incredible job at the PD in cleaning our data, like a lot of places. And if you're in private business, you probably understand this. Data's great, but if it's bad data ins, bad data out. So we couldn't really define our problem very well in many of the crime categories that we were addressing or attempting to address. So it became really important. They're just different laws. I mean, the ATF's sole purpose is, in large part, is to address violent gang crime. And so it only made sense for us to shift our gang unit into working as TFOs. And what that allows them to do is it gives them federal authority. And so when our patrol officers, and I'll show you some numbers here in a minute, when our patrol officers stop somebody, they're a felon, which means they've been convicted of a felony of some sort, whether it's a felony burglary, a sexual assault, domestic violence crime, murder, gang crime, whatever the case may be, and our officers find them in possession of a firearm. We now have task force officers that can write that indictment. And our indictments have gone up exceptionally in the last 18 months. I'll have the numbers here shortly. So our strategy is focused deterrence. There's a lot of research on evidence-based models in policing. This is probably the most significant one. So one we selected, it's out of John Jay University, a guy named David Kennedy. He wrote the book Don't Shoot. If you ever read about the miracle in Boston in the early mid-1990s, they reduced violent gun crime to epic lows. It's incredible. And so then they replicated it in cities across the country and across the world in the last 30 years. And so it had been studied by a lot of universities, a lot of academics, and it really built a model of it's more than just the police job to stop the shooting. You got to get the community involved. You got to get the area of your community where the impact is, and you got to find the ambassadors in those communities to make a big impact. And how we do that is through the WAY program, and I think they call them something else, but in short, they're credible mentors, the people that understand that lifestyle and understand the language, the lingo, the families, and can make a rapport in a way that a police officer couldn't, because we have a job to do. We have a duty. We have to arrest somebody that's committed a crime. There are things that we just cannot overlook that somebody in the community can. And so combining those two efforts is how we got to WAY. And so that's what focused deterrence is. And it's the strong arm of the law, for lack of better words. It's when the police say that there is a crime and they are going to enforce the law that they actually do it. And as you can probably imagine, we get really busy. We take about 55,000 calls a year, and we have about 160 of these incidents. Well, it's really important on each one of those incidents that we take it serious, that we have protocols in place to ensure that they're getting the information in a timely manner, that it's investigated appropriately and thoroughly, but that we're also working with those other people in our community that can reduce the problem through spending time building rapport, using the social services models of wraparound services, which we can't do. State and local prosecutions are critically important. The notification to the gang members, they spend a lot of time telling families that, hey, this is what the outcomes are going to be if you continue down this road. And that's one piece to the education to the community, spending time here, because having this message to each and every one of you, you also spread that message out into the community, just like we would do in each one of our domestic violence coalition meetings that we have each month. It's spreading the message to those willing ears that will then go into their organizations, their families, their churches, their communities, and then say, hey, there's something we can do. We can be a part of the solution. You may have, it sounds like you had Chief Murray out here recently, and he probably talked about crime numbers. Which those are the outcomes. Those are what we get judged at as a police department. Are we making an impact through our defined strategies? And we believe we are. We had another year where we had a drop in aggravated assault. And aggravated assault, if you listen to Chief Murray, he probably said that aggravated assault as opposed to homicide was a better indicator of crime trend. And that's because you have a larger sample. We typically get 10 to 15 homicides a year. We have just under 100,000 people in our community, probably par for the course. Each one of those 10 to 15 is a tragic and terrible incident. We've had some awful ones this year, ones that we hope to never repeat. But it doesn't tell you the whole story about crime in our community. What aggravated assaults tell you is a bigger sample of the type of assaults that are occurring. And so we went from 2022, which we had 17% drop from 2021, from 198 down to 160, and so we're going in the right direction, and we just hope to keep that trend going. Mind you, one thing that we spent a lot of time researching with our numbers is our domestic violence enforcement went up. We asked questions that we weren't asking a couple of years ago. We are historically investigating domestic violence, so it's not just that 911 call that brought us to the home. They're asking questions about historical abuse patterns, and then when they have evidence to charge or arrest for things that happened months, days, years earlier, they're doing that. And so that's raising our crime numbers. And so that would be the asterisk, I guess, is a good way of saying that. And that's on purpose. We want to know about the historical abuses that are occurring in domestic violence because that helps us make a bigger impact. The main purpose that the gang unit exists, no doubt about it, is to reduce gun violence. I mean, that is the bottom line. We are out to reduce gun violence. To give you a snapshot of how many guns we take in, this is since January of 2022, so just over a year and a half. We've taken in almost 700 guns. 191 of those are in court orders where the court has said you need to turn your gun into police because you're no longer lawfully allowed to possess it, and people actually do in some cases, 191 of them. We sometimes have people just drop them off at the police department. They had a family member pass, they don't know what to do with it, they don't feel safe having it in their own home, they're not a gun person, and so they bring it down to the police department. And we had 363 that are evidence. So that means 363 of the 699 guns are attached to a criminal investigation where we are in that person's life, we have a crime that we're investigating, and the officers, detectives, have written search warrants, they've seized it on traffic stops, so on and so forth, and so they're taking a lot of guns off the streets. There is a significant access to firearms, largely illegal firearms, in every community in America, and that's just the bottom line. This is a snapshot of ours. I'm sure if you pulled numbers from any community in the country, they're going to look very similar, and it's a little bit shocking to see that. And those are just the ones we're getting. The predominant firearm that we are seizing as evidence is a Glock. And so that's just the top 4 or 5. There was hundreds of them on the page when I pulled the report. And so kind of gives you an idea of what these officers are seeing out on the street when they're out on patrol. So a little bit scary. So we mentioned federal indictments, and that when we talk about federal indictment, it is key, especially in the focus deterrence world. If you've read that book, you hear David Kennedy talking about the impact of federal indictments, because that is like federal time, that there's just a difference. They don't take as many cases, so you look at the amount of prosecutions handled at the municipal level, it's about 8,000 a year, I think. At the felony level, another couple, 3,000 a year. And at the federal prosecution level for just the city of Yakima, a very, very small number, because they're looking for the big fish often. In many cases, they're looking for the drug traffickers, they're looking for the gun traffickers, the person producing and creating child pornography and things like that. They're just on a different level. And so as you can tell, once we moved our detectives over as task force officers, which was years in the making. In fact, Captain Boyle and I, when we were on the gang team, had the very first meeting back in 2019, so it took some time to get this going. And so now they're pulling down some really big numbers. Those are all felons. Those are all people in our community that had access to illegal firearms, that were found to have firearms in their possession. So they're doing some incredible work. Those are not easy cases to deal with. They take a lot of time, energy, and resources to put together. So we just applaud the work of our gang unit for all of the great things that they've been doing for us in our community, in addition to working with all of our community partners. So they have a pretty busy day. So I was able to string 2 of them out here, and the others are probably putting more cases together. So when we talk about the intersection of gang violence and domestic violence, what Detective Shad put together was a look at the top 5 shooters. So those are the top 5 people in our community that were most likely to put an illegal gun in their hand and commit a shooting crime. They all began to have contacts with the police at around middle school. They were all raised by a single mother. Their mothers were chronic victims of intimate partner violence. So that means a person that they were in a dating relationship, they were a spouse of, had a child in common with. One of the top shooters was arrested for intimate partner violence, and all grew up in poverty. And so when we talk about how do we make an impact in gang violence in our community, we have to understand what's driving it, what's creating it, what's causing it. And that's where these 2 efforts are intersecting. We basically have 3 main efforts at the police department, and that's our domestic violence, as you've probably seen in media articles, our gang intervention, which is actually our oldest interventions, about 5 or 6 years we're into this now, and then traffic enforcement. And these 2 things, gang violence, domestic violence, there's a lot of intersections is what we're finding. We often get asked, why are kids going into gangs? Well, they're drifting into gangs because often, in many cases, family disruption. So the family unit is not a safe unit. And so you think of like the hierarchy of needs, shelter, food, safety. When those things don't exist in your home, you're going to drift to a place where you feel like you're getting those things, whether it's accurate or not. And gangs are looking for those vulnerable children in our community because they're easy pulls and recruitments into the gang life. They don't have to convince you to go home and eat dinner at 5 o'clock and sit at the table and say your evening prayers with your family before you start dinner, because that doesn't exist. They're lucky to have food. So if a gang can provide you a little bit of food, a little bit of money, some safety, because safety in numbers, and these are, a violent group of numbers. So if I've got some misguided issues at home and I need some sort of safety net because I'm getting picked on at school, then I may drift into a gang. So we always believed that was the case, that family disruption, domestic violence, so on and so forth, was probably a driver of some of our gang issues. We now know it as fact because our detectives are putting in the work to look at the research and connect these families. When we went into the domestic violence program, the first thing we did is something very similar. We took the top shooters and just rolled back the history on them. And was domestic violence present? And almost all of the families, domestic violence was present. And not just witnessed by that child, but also one generation back. So you look at the parents and what they experienced as children, often we found domestic violence. So if you want to know what's one of the leading causes of gang recruitment in our community, it's family disruption. It's the same things we talked about of what's driving domestic violence. Yes?
We have a family name. Are there certain families that provoke the gang activity in Like, for example, Calcurcios and Seattle, the Tamlin gang group. Is there a name in Yakima that is identified as a gang recruiting and et cetera, drugs?
There are dynasty families.
That you identify. Basically, you say, okay, you know this person is a relative of.
If I heard a certain name, I might be more critical of it. I might suspect, but I am very, very hesitant to label anybody a gang member. I would not label anybody a gang member simply because of the family they belong to. Their behavior is what identifies them as a gang member. And until I see that behavior, I won't call anybody anything.
What we know exists is generational cycles of violence within families. And that is a contributor and a leading cause to children that drift into gangs. Just because domestic violence exists in your home doesn't mean that you're going to go to a gang. It doesn't even mean that you're going to experience that as an adult. What it means is that it increases the odds. And so we look at things like the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, and where do those things play into some of these efforts? And we know that there's a significant impact for those children that are experiencing disruptive homes. And I use disruptive on purpose because not every domestic violence crime we go to or incident is a crime, and not every gang incident they go to is a crime. There's a small number of both of those that are actually criminal in nature. And so, but what's important is that disruption element, because then it starts to get at the adverse childhood experiences, which is why we started a program called Handle with Care with our schools that some of you may have heard about. Go ahead.
I know we're getting close to time, but first things first, thank you guys for everything you do for our community. I know we say that, but it always gets said enough. But my question is, we're talking a lot about deterrence, and I see this a line here about getting kids around middle school.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the community understands that the city of Yakima's priority changed, and we no longer have YPD school resource officers. We have really the equivalent of a in-house private security firm, which they're great. They're wonderful. Nate's doing a wonderful job leading us. But I don't think the community understands that. When I hear people ask that kind of question, the question is always, well, how in the world is the police department interacting with kids, whether it's like we go all the way back to the DARE program on forward. What does that look like? How are we getting at these kids within the school system to stop this before it happens?
Captain Boyle, would you like to? Well, we do a variety of things. You brought up DARE, so I'm going to address the concept of like classroom activity type things. Those are great programs, no doubt about it. And we've had those in years past. Not to get too far into the weeds, we have a staffing issue just like a lot of police departments in the country. So we had to identify what are our strategic priorities while still continuing the outreach, still continuing to make collaborative connections with our schools. How we address some of these behaviors is through our collaborative meetings. The school district is on our WAY program. The school district is a key contributor to our domestic violence programming. And so we are addressing it through the problem itself and working strategically with the impacted families that we've identified, which we've never done before, which DARE and GREAT just simply don't do. Not to say those are ineffective, and I've never read any research that says they are or they aren't. They're great. But we decided to strategically address it from the problem side. We know the families that are experiencing these issues, and so we are working directly with school officials, which no doubt about it, the Yakima School District is a fantastic partner of ours. But unfortunately, what schools and correctional facilities have turned into is also ad hoc mental health facilities. Because as you can imagine, these children are experiencing some pretty horrible things and then have to get up in the morning and go to school. And so we're working it from the problem angle. And do you guys have anything additional on that?
Just to talk a little bit about, and I don't know, I'll bring up the laws too. Part of our decision making was there's issues with the funding. We have staffing issues, but a lot of the laws do not allow us to interact with children anymore that commit crimes. And I call them children, but these kids at 15, 16-year-old have more life experience than a majority of us sitting in this room. But when we arrest a juvenile, 17 and under, we're not allowed to talk to them without calling an attorney in Seattle. Usually it's a Seattle-based attorney. There's a hotline we call. We can't interview them. So if we go to a shooting scene and our shooter is 15 years old and his accomplice is 16, we can't conduct any interviews of those kids without calling an attorney to be able to have some type of, they have to have legal counsel. They can't waive their rights. Their parents can't make them talk to us. So some of the laws that were put in, the police reform and ideas, and Chad hit it on the head. Kids go to, when we're talking a murder at 15, 16, you're talking weeks and months, not years in prison. They're incarcerated till 21 years old, and then they're turned loose.
They're incarcerated at a facility for several months and then go to a group home where they are free to leave during the day until they're 21.
So there's a lot of accountability issues as far as with the criminal justice system and juveniles. I think Chad hasn't talked about it, but drawing a blank right now, we notify the schools in the morning. Handle with care. Every time our officer encounters somebody in some type of crisis, they go to a domestic violence call, their house burns down the night before, their parents were arrested for DUI or some other crime, the school district gets notified, and all they're provided is we had an interaction. They don't know the details of the case, but their teachers are notified that there may be, Yvette had a traumatic incident at her house last night. If she's a little off, there's something that maybe she give her a little bit of break today where she's acting out in class. So that's been a huge part of this domestic violence program to try to intervene, because, you know, if you're, like Chad said, if you don't get dinner, your parents have a fight till 2 in the morning, we show up, you don't get back to bed till 3 o'clock, how are you prepared for school at 8 a.m.? So I think that we're doing the best we can at interacting with the kids. There's a lot of just issues. I know a lot of the officers take the time to go out of their way to make those connections. You know, they get out of their car and talk to kids. And then the gang unit, like you said, dealing directly with these families, which has never been, we haven't done it ever. So hopefully, and if Chad talked about it, we've even moved a family relocated out of our state to help them get away from the gang violence. So there's a lot of but we can't do that as a police department. That's the community has to be involved and provide the resources to help us out with those things.
I think we're getting pretty close to the end here. And so the goals of our work are to continue to use data and intel strategically reduce violent crime, which we're on a positive trend in that note, working with our community and our partners to revive our community. And what some of the things that were just kind of lost, one of the things that when we set out to deal with the domestic violence issue in our community, a lot of folks had they were exhausted. Our cops were exhausted, the prosecutors were exhausted. And so, you know, just kind of building back that confidence that, yeah, we can do this. We can come together as a community and we can accomplish this, and really take the 10,000 foot level and work strategically and kind of get away from some of those more umbrella, big net approaches that we've seen in our historical times that we just don't believe had as significant of an impact. And so I'll end with this. Findings, this is a CDC report. Findings revealed that frequent and ongoing exposure to neighborhood violence, personal and familial trauma led many youth to normalize experiences of violence. And what that means is that we have to get out of this trend of very young children experiencing violence at home, in the community, and anywhere else if we really want to make an impact. And that is truly what we are working on, what we set out to do in both of these efforts. So with that, I will open it up to any questions that you all may have. We truly appreciate the opportunity to speak to you, and all of the work we are doing, we could not do without you, the community.
And if anybody wants to stay after, because I know we're running a little late here, but this is, I mean, we can have this for hours, I think.
This happens to me all the time.
We're getting booted off the stage. Oh my gosh, that was so interesting. So Joe and I, years ago, we had a lovely date to the Walla Walla Pen as a tour, and that was the number one thing that they said with the gangs that were in there at that time was that they had that the gang members that were in there said that it's because their moms didn't read to them. And obviously it's probably not necessarily about the reading, but that the relationship of the moms, you know, when you read to a child, you hug and you care about them. And then I always tell all of you, I'm the Head Start director locally. And so we are definitely seeing an increase in domestic violence. I think the pandemic had a major impact on the level of domestic violence. And so trying to get services in as young as possible, because I know that we have young siblings and their older siblings are in gangs. So thank you very much for what you do every day. So once again, I want to thank all of Yakima PD for coming. We thought we were going to get one, and we got a whole crowd. So yes, that's nice. Safety in numbers. And then thank our greeters and introductions, Paul and Gib, Steve, and I'll say Lynn for Sergeant at Arms, and our special guest. And as we remember, what do? You make a difference. Meeting adjourned.